We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This July 4th, we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which was published back in 1776. But I want to know, why is this event worth celebrating? What is it about the American founding that is important to me as a Jewish American that makes it worth commemorating it 250 years later?
American Jewish history isn't somebody else's history. Part of America's history and part of the history of America's Jews. July 4th, in many ways, shaped the kind of country that Jews in the 19th and 20th century wanted to immigrate to, thought that America would offer them opportunities and freedoms that they had not been able to enjoy in Central and Eastern Europe.
This is Dr. Jonathan Sarna, a historian of Jewish American history, who is here to help us answer these questions.
I devoted my life to American Jewish history, to Jewish studies broadly. Wrote a book entitled American Judaism, a history, as well as many more specialized volumes on American Jewish history and life.
In this video, we're going to explore what is unique about America, both in its promises and its challenges, the role the Jews played in the founding of this country, and what all of it means for us today.
Today, 90% of world Jewry lives in two places, America and Israel. That is a huge change. You have to go back to antiquity, to a time when it was, as we say, Bavel Yerushalayim, Babylonia and Jerusalem, for the Jewish world to really be in two places. And it's going to take some getting used to.
Before we continue, let me just take a brief moment to introduce myself. My name is David Ackerman, and here on Yiddishkeit, we explore the experience of Jewishness. To me, that looks like exploring Jewish history, culture, and art. The story of Jews in America is fundamental to the way that I view my own Jewishness, and the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence is the perfect opportunity to zoom out and look at the big questions, such as what makes America unique? At the time of the American Revolution, there were only about 1,500 to 2,000 Jews in what would become the United States of America, while the rest of the Jews were spread across the world. In most parts of the world at the time, Jews were not considered citizens, which meant, on the one hand, their rights were not protected, but also that they weren't able to really participate in the country as equals.
The 1790s is just the period when Catherine is creating what's called in English the Pale of Settlement. Jews can live here, they can't live there, they can't be part of the major cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's fascinating, really, that exactly the same time that Catherine is trying hard to restrict Jews, and soon Nicholas I will stick them in the army so that they'll lose their Jewishness and so on, that we see something very different in America. America is an extraordinary experiment of what happens to Jews and Judaism under freedom.
It was in America where there was freedom of religion, which would go on to shape the experience of Jewishness, which we're familiar with today. This ability to choose if and how one identifies with their Jewishness is baked into the experience of being a Jew in America, all the way to the first arrivals back in 1654, through the American founding, all the way to us today.
If you look back at the earliest, the Jews of the Revolutionary era, sure, there were some who said, it's a free country. We can marry whoever we want. There's no rabbi. Rebecca Samuel writes to her mother, there's no rabbi in all of America to excommunicate anybody. And that's a major challenge. But I'm more impressed with those who said, like Jonas Phillips, yeah, I can be active as a Jew, but I also can influence America. And since he had so many children, it's fascinating to see how many of his descendants, one is a congressman, others are politically engaged in America, but nevertheless Jewishly identified. Chaim Solomon brings a good deal of money to the new nation, but at the same time he is very active in synagogue life. He sends money back to Europe to his own relatives and worries about what he calls in Yiddish, wenig Yiddishkeit, not much Jewishness. I think it's important for Jews to know, yeah, we're shaped by what's going on around us, but we're also shaped by what's going on inside the Jewish community. It's not an either or. Every Jew is torn between the one and the other. The different ones will make different kinds of choices. That's been true really for a long time.
This newfound liberty which Jews had in America posed a new set of questions, which was, what does it mean to be a Jew not under compulsion by the community or persecution, which unfortunately Jews were all too familiar with, but rather under freedom? And starting with those very first Jews in America all the way to us today, we wrestle with the very same questions of what does freedom actually mean? Is it freedom to worship or freedom not to? And does modern innovation help Jewish life or does it dilute it? This tension is the central question of what it means to be a Jew in the modern age, which is formulated as tradition versus modernity, but has come to define the experience of being a Jew in America. The many different answers that Jews would give to this question over the years explains the wide array of Jewish expressions in America.
There always were people who were deeply frightened. Oh, if there's freedom, everyone will lose everything if we don't enforce this law and this law and this law. And the truth is that most of the Jewish world went a different way. America is the great exception. But in America, Judaism really had to learn how to survive in a competitive free market world that was totally based on voluntary compliance. In other words, nobody's going to fine you for not going to synagogue. Nobody's going to put you in jail if you intermarry or prevent you from doing so. We somehow have to learn how to live with freedom. And American Jews did. I know some are still critical of freedom, and maybe it's the worst system in the world except for all the others. That has always been the challenge. Those are the people who most interest me, the people who insist that they can be Americans and Jews. And some of them may not be religious, but a Louis Brandeis, who was a central figure in American Zionism, indeed argued we're better Americans if we're good Jews. There's certainly a tension. But yes, there have always been Jews who have lived in both places and are proud of it.
So many of the stories that Jewish Americans resonate with have to do with this theme of what does it mean to be a Jew from a place of choice rather than compulsion. From the story of Tevye and his daughters in Fiddler on the Roof, to Danny Saunders in The Chosen, to even more recent stories like Nobody Wants This, they're all explorations on the same theme. And so the Jews in America during the Revolutionary War understood that despite the challenges that freedom would bring, that it was preferable to the persecution that their family members were experiencing at that very same moment in Europe, from economic limitations to oppressive laws and expulsions.
More than generally realized, Jews had a role in the revolution. That may sound strange, considering there were only 1,500 to 2,000 Jews in the area that became the United States. There were Jewish Tories as well. Most of them had to leave. The majority of Jews were patriots. There are many ways in which they contributed. First, we have a list of about 100 Jews who fought in the revolution. That's incredibly important. It allowed Jews to make the case. We fought for these freedoms, not just beneficiaries. In some countries, let's say Russia, we know that Jews hated fighting in the army. Not so in America. And the reason is, in America, they were treated like everybody else. It's the only country at that time where Jews could rise up through the ranks.
Many of the Jewish veterans of the Revolutionary War are buried in the oldest Jewish cemetery in America in New York City, right off of the Bowery. This cemetery dates back to 1682 and remained in use until the 1820s. In fact, each year the cemetery hosts a memorial for the Jewish veterans buried there, and I had a chance to attend it this year. It was extremely meaningful to pay my respects to the people who risked their lives to help establish this country, from which I benefit so much. What's really interesting is not only did the people buried in the cemetery participate in the Revolutionary War, but the cemetery itself participated when, in 1776, one of Washington's generals placed a cannon in the cemetery facing the East River.
Jews also participated in other ways. They gave money. They disproportionately involved, I would say, in raising funds for the new nation. Chaim Solomon brings a good deal of money to the new nation, sells bonds. Some of the founders were deeply grateful to him. He was a kind of genius in changing money. Every colony, of course, had its own money, so people who could do that work were very valuable.
Chaim Solomon, one of the most famous financiers of the American Revolution, was never repaid for the contributions he made to many of the founding fathers and the army, and ultimately died penniless. But I think that even if he was made whole monetarily, that his contribution, like that of so many others, both Jew and Christian alike, can never be repaid.
What was not spoken about for a long time was the role of the Dutch colony of St. Eustatius in strengthening the revolutionary forces. The Dutch didn't like the British in those days and were happy to help the revolution by providing, if you like, helping to smuggle munitions and other materiel, shoes and the like, to George Washington's army. Now, 30% of the white population of St. Eustatius were Jews, and merchants were, of course, the key people who knew how to procure material, how to transport it, if you like, how to smuggle it. We know that that made a huge difference. St. Eustatius had many more Jews than Philadelphia. It also helped Jews to get wealthy. A man like Jonas Phillips, who had come to America as an indentured servant, was president of Mikveh Israel. Jonas Phillips made a lot of money, and we have a letter in which he encourages some of his relatives to come and get goods to America. You can make 100% on your money. So it was good for America and good for them. The British general who captures St. Eustatius says that if it weren't for what St. Eustatius was doing, they would have won and defeated the revolutionary forces a long time before. None of this was much talked about for a long time.
After the war came to a close, the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia in order to form a government which can have enough force to rule over the country, but without falling into tyranny, the likes of which they had just recently thrown off. And during that time, Jews would also continue to contribute to the founding of the new country, particularly to the idea of religious freedom.
The very fact that the largest Jewish community during the Revolution was actually in Philadelphia, the very place where the Declaration and the Constitution was written, and people who came to Philadelphia were likely to encounter Jews. So they knew that, oh, there were non-Christians in this country, and they're patriotic. It's not accident at all that these great documents are talking about liberty for people of every religion, equal footing, as they might have said, and did not make one religion, say Protestantism, ahead of others.
Many Jews who supported the revolution found themselves in Philadelphia after the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. Most famously, perhaps, is the Chazan of the congregation in New York named Gershom Mendes Seixas, who took the Torah scrolls and other sacred objects from New York to Connecticut and eventually settled in Philadelphia. As a side point, the position of Chazan is a cantor who leads the services in the synagogue, but before the arrival of the first ordained rabbi to America in the mid-1800s, the Chazan served some of the functions of a rabbi, such as performing weddings, brisim, and funerals. It was the Jewish community in Philadelphia which influenced the Constitutional Convention to include Jews as equal citizens in this new country. One notable example is of a man named Jonas Phillips, who we mentioned earlier, who was a merchant who originally arrived to America as an indentured servant. And he was worried that Jews might be excluded from the rights to vote and to hold office, which they already had in certain colonies like New York. And so he wrote to the delegates of the Constitutional Convention, imploring them not to require an oath on Christian faith in order to hold office in the United States. Unknown to him, 2 weeks before he sent his letter, the convention had already approved Article 6 of the Constitution, which says that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. And 2 years later, Congress passed the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, which says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And this further strengthened religious freedom in America, which benefited Jewish people.
It's a very significant time for all sorts of reasons worth studying and remembering from the perspective of people today. It's those great documents that have had ongoing impact.
But there's one key difference between the liberties that Jews got under the American government versus the European governments who started to give Jews rights in the 1800s, known as emancipation. And that is that the Declaration of Independence opens with this idea of self-evident right to liberty, which means that it's inherent to the person, as opposed to in Europe where these rights were vested in a ruler who could then later retract these rights if it no longer suited them. We can see this important distinction in the letter that George Washington wrote to the Jewish community of Newport in 1790 after he was inaugurated as the first president of the United States. In that letter, he assures them that the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction and to persecution no assistance. Meaning that in America, Jews did not need to worry about government-sanctioned persecution, which unfortunately was all too common throughout Jewish history.
The most important thing in that letter is that he says it's not just toleration that Jews should expect, as if it were by the indulgence of one group that another enjoys, and now we come to the crucial phrase, it's inherent natural rights. Whereas in Europe, everywhere, emancipation was a quid pro quo. We'll give you emancipation, but you have to change your ways. If you don't change your ways, we take it away. Germany did take it away multiple times, and others threatened. Inherent natural rights can't be taken away. So what George Washington was saying was that when the Declaration speaks of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, liberty includes religious liberty, and religious liberty for everyone. An inherent natural right, or in the Declaration's terms, self-evident right. That was a great innovation.
This is how the Jews of the late 1700s in America contributed to the founding of the United States and what set in motion a new chapter of Jewish history. It was these freedoms from persecution and to worship as one wishes that started to appeal to the Jews of Europe, who began to immigrate to America in ever-increasing numbers.
Those letters from America where Jews said, come, there's freedom and there's opportunity. The 1840s, when Jews are persecuted in German lands, have significant anti-Jewish laws, places you can't live, places you can't work, you can't form families. So they begin to come in the late 19th and 20th century until it's cut off. Millions of East European Jews come to America's shores. They shape what is today, by far, the largest diaspora Jewish community in the world. What's important to remember is how much change occurred in the lifetime of individuals. I'm soon putting out a book on Mark Twain and the Jews. When Mark Twain is born in 1835 in Hannibal, Missouri, no Jews in Hannibal, Missouri, and there was no rabbi in all of America. The first rabbi is 1840 when he's 5 years old. By the time he dies in 1910, there are millions of Jews in America already. So in one person's lifetime, there was a tremendous transformation. And that's true of that whole generation. That's one of the reasons I love writing about them. That was the generation that came to terms with the presence of Jews in America.
If you are a Jew in America today, chances are you either trace your heritage to an ancestor who was an immigrant to America, or are like my family who recently immigrated to America from the former Soviet Union at the end of the 20th century.
We don't pay enough attention to the immigrants who came since World War II. The largest group by far are people like you, about 750,000 Russian-speaking Jews, meaning people who left Russia, the Ukraine, and their children. It's a big number, but we also have a very large number now of Latin American Jews. The largest Spanish-speaking Jewish community in the world is South Florida. There are also, of course, a big Persian community and Jews from other countries, South Africa. But that's really the reason that the Jewish population today is counted as about 7.5 million, whereas for a long time people said, well, it's 5.7. And you say, well, how did it grow so fast? It's not mostly because of natural increase. It's mostly because of new immigrants.
Because of these equal opportunities, Jews were able to find a home in America and, for better or for worse, have become part of the American story.
It's very important to know that Jews are part of America. They are influenced by American conditions. So when there's a civil war, that impacts on Jews as well. And you can't overlook it. When there's a Great Depression, that impacts on Jews. In other words, to properly study American Jewish history, there's both an internal Jewish dynamic, but also a larger world of which Jews are a part. Maybe all, but certainly most of the crucial trends in American life have impacted in various ways on American Jewish life. And so it's really both an internal and an external history that one has to examine.
But how is the promise of America actually held up over time? Is the fact that America is home to Jews today worth celebrating in 2026? What about the fact that Jews in America today face so many challenges? Most notably is the rise of Jew hatred.
Previous years of anti-Semitism have created, Jewish leaders have created very important new directions in American Jewish life. The late 19th century, Henrietta Zoll, then very young, Cyrus Adler, they create books and reference tools and libraries. They do everything they can to strengthen Jewish life, and they succeed. Those are central themes and organizations in the 20th century. During the interwar years, where there's terrible anti-Semitism, Henry Ford, Father Coughlin, quotas at so many universities, many places where discrimination is openly practiced, where Jews cannot live. In Florida, there were signs, always a Jew, never a Jew. Shameless signs. But then it got better. I mean, it took a terrible war and the Shoah, but people said, hey, we don't want to be like that.
In the wake of the attacks of October 7th and the rise of both far-right and far-left Jew hatred, a journalist named Franklin Foer published an article in The Atlantic called "The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending." In the article, Foer explains that Jews had invested in this idea of liberalism, which was a combination of championing civil rights as well as the idea of pluralism, in the hopes that they would be included into American society and prevent the spread of Jew hatred. However, in the essay, he describes what in his view is the collapse of the liberal order both on the right and left wings of American politics, leading to the end of Jewish liberalism and what he calls the end of the Jewish Golden Age in America. When this article came out in early 2024, it sent a shockwave through the Jewish community. And over the past 2 years, especially with the rise of acceptable Jew hatred both in American politics and on social media, I began to wonder about this article and if its premise was correct.
Have things changed in 2026 from the way they were 20 years ago? Yeah, I think they have, especially in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism that we didn't expect to see. I think your generation, or your children, when they look back, they'll say, anti-Semitism in America went up and down. Big rise in anti-Semitism in the late 19th century. Big rise in anti-Semitism after World War I. And then we had this remarkable 50-year period after World War II and the Holocaust, where things got better for Jews every decade by decade. And indeed, in the year 2000, Jews thought the Messiah must be coming. The president of Harvard is Jewish. And an Orthodox Jew, Joe Lieberman, is on the Democratic ticket for the vice presidency. And some believed that anti-Semitism was behind us, but it didn't turn out that way. And in that sense, I get it, that people think it's a very different era. I think we will look back and say, that 50-year span, that was unusual. And I'm not surprised Jews look back at a golden age, but you can define a golden age in many ways. And if we look back and say, Jews became more Jewish, Jewish education rose, Jewish communal ties were strengthened, that sounds pretty golden to me. They define a golden age differently. So the earlier looked at a golden age in terms of acceptance in the non-Jewish world, whereas I think you're suggesting, I think maybe rightly, that there were many immigrants who would see a golden age as a time when Jews became more Jewish, when they were able to attend day schools in larger numbers and summer camps in larger numbers, where Jewish civilization was strengthened. And that's just a different definition. I'm more optimistic than some that anti-Semitism actually functions to make Jews stronger, that in response to threats, Jews come together and develop new resources.
Having been born into an unprecedented era of good feelings towards Jews in America, seeing the rise of Jew hatred is definitely alarming, but if we zoom out, we can get perspective on the questions of our age by looking at the larger historical and societal trends.
East European immigration, let's say 1880s to 1920, it's not just Jews who are coming. It's a period when Italians are coming in large numbers and other people as well. It's an era of mass migration. When people look back at our time, we may notice the rise of anti-Semitism, but I think that if you were Hispanic or Asian, you would notice, hatred directed against those populations as well in the same period. The more complex your analysis, the more likely you will approach the truth about American Jewish history.
It's in these darker days where there is a renewed interest in Jewish identity, but also on the ideals of the American founding, that of the inherent right to liberty.
The promise of America is still an incredibly important theme. That's just a reminder that we should never take those things for granted. I think it was Franklin who said, it's a republic if you can keep it. Part of our job in what are really difficult days is to speak up for some of those central ideas that made America distinctive.
Despite all the challenges that we as Jewish Americans face today, to me, as a relative newcomer to the story, the promise of America, whether it's the founding documents or Washington's letters to the Jews or the letters that the Jews in America wrote to their family in Europe, are still as relevant today as they were 250 years ago.
Jews in the former Soviet Union whom I know, feel you guys don't know what it means to live in an anti-Semitic country compared to where we were. This is heaven. As somebody who is quite active in what we call the Soviet Jewry movement, I always, as they say in Yiddish, shep nachas from, you understand it, from people who we help bring over and who are doing the kinds of things that you were bringing over. None of us imagined, I didn't imagine even in 1986 when I visited refuseniks, would never have occurred to me that all those Jews would leave Russia and come to America and Israel. It seemed beyond belief. And the fact that it happens, one of the great miracles of our time.
As the home of one of the biggest Jewish populations in the world, the future of Jewishness in America is a very important question and is one of the driving forces behind this channel. Over the past year, I kept thinking about, what if I could go back in time and meet my ancestors who were living in 1776, probably in some Ukrainian shtetl? What would I say to them? How would I explain the experience of an American Jew to them? And would they even be able to understand what I meant? I think what I would say to them would be something like this. I would say, I know that right now you are experiencing a level of poverty and persecution, which I can't even begin to imagine. But just know this, that one day your descendants will go to another country called America, which is based on the ideals of the inherent right to liberty. And over there, I'm able to experience Jewishness on my own terms without the fear of compulsion and, of course, of persecution.
If one could go back in time, it would be fascinating to surprise that tiny community, 1,500, 2,000 Jews, with the news of what later happened. They certainly could never have imagined such a thing. In the same way, I have to say that many of the founders could never have imagined a country that would have 350 million people. They would have been very surprised to see what America became, and I think the early Jews would likewise have been surprised.
The Jews who live in America have been shaped by the freedoms that it has to offer, but would also go on to shape America itself, from everything like entertainment and cuisine to business and academia.
America greatly benefited from Jews, and Jews greatly benefited from America.
What is America to me?
If you're still watching, I want to thank you for being here to the end of this video. I want to give a big thank you to Dr. Sarna for taking his time to share some of his knowledge, wisdom, and answer some of the big questions of what it means to be a Jew in America today. If you're interested in Jewish history, culture, and art, then you, my friend, are in the right place. This channel is all about that. There are plenty of videos on similar topics that you can check out. My name is David, and welcome to Yiddishkeit.
That's America